today we're doing an overview of how in-house executive search firms approach their mission, to ensure that their organizations are attracting and hiring the best talent possible. We'll examine the friction between organizational protocol, often associated with big hiring teams, and what is more specialized high-stakes leadership hiring, and specifically how internal executive search functions can move from a very reactive state where they're perhaps policing rogue searches to a much more proactive role within the organization and serving as a trusted strategic partner to leadership around bringing in new talent to the organization. So today with us, we have three executive search in-house TA leaders. We have Natalie Dupont from Lululemon, Gary Blintz from Danaher, and Jason Wiggin from TD Securities. So I'll ask each of you to give a quick intro of yourself, and then we'll move into the discussion.
Great.
So,
I could start.
Natalie, you want to start?
Yeah. Yes, my name's Natalie Dupont. I lead executive search as well as our international recruiting teams at Lululemon. I've been with Lululemon about just over 5 years, and I'm based now in London, England.
Great, thank you. Gary?
Sure. Thanks, Don and team, for having us. So I'm Gary Blintz, and I run exec recruiting for Danaher. I'm based in Florida, but have a global scope in terms of the exec recruiting practice.
Great. And Jason?
Hey, everyone. So Jason Wiggin, I run recruitment for TD Securities globally. We've got teams in London, Singapore, Toronto, and New York. I'm relatively new. I've been here about 18 months. Prior to TD, I ran executive recruitment at Standard Chartered Bank based in Singapore for about 7 years.
Great, thanks. And sorry, I neglected to introduce Jim or let him introduce himself. Jim is one of the other partners here at Buffkin Baker. So Jim, quick intro.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Partner of Buffkin Baker. I've been with this group through acquisition for about 4 years total, but been in executive search for the past decade and heavy focus in executive HR, finance, and go-to-market.
Great. So when I think about executive search in-house, there's probably two ends of the spectrum that it could possibly operate. The first is really replacing external executive search or replacing search firms. And they often have a mandate to reduce costs, execute the senior searches entirely in-house. And really it's kind of a cost play. And then the other end is being a facilitator. So a function that purely spends time selecting external firms like Buffkin Baker and others, facilitates the process, develops vendor lists and things like that. In almost every case, the truth is somewhere in the middle. And so what I've seen is that some of the best functions do a great mix of both of those things. Obviously, they have a strong process to make sure that everything is getting done appropriately and cost effectively, but they're also not afraid of spending money, and engaging search firms where they need to. And are there to build the relationships in ways that, frankly, members of the senior executive team can't, through constant contact and things like that with the search firms. So I'll turn it over to Jim to talk a little bit about the strategic intent of these functions.
Yeah, and let's dive right in from the very beginning of the process. So Nat, when an executive vacancy occurs, how are you notified? What are the first few questions that are really determining if your team is going to handle this in-house or you'll look to an external partner?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're typically notified, I would say, either through the leader directly, based on either that relationship or the needs at that time, or through our people and culture leaders, our HR leaders. And I would say over the last number of years at Lululemon, as an internal executive search firm, we've worked really hard to build relationships across the business and people and culture. So now we receive even more of a heads up around potential searches that we may need to support on, where in years past, I would say it was a lot more reactive, and there was less kind of early conversations around potential support. The support is typically pretty typical for roles that may be around attrition risk, performance concerns, or organizational shifts. And then now, over the last number of years, we've started to shift more into proactive support around succession planning as well. We typically, so once we hear of that role, then we typically ask questions around, if it's a new role, is it a replacement? Is the incumbent in role? And I would say a lot of those are really understanding the level of confidentiality, and if confidential, what the timing of that is, when it could be communicated to the organization, and if there is a period of time where that would be confidential, then we would typically engage a partner. And there may be scenarios where we wouldn't do that, but that would be our typical assumption. And the secondary reason that we would really, look to engage a partner, as we start to learn more about that role, is like a very niche skill set or a skill set that just is more challenging to access to talent, through kind of less typical sourcing methods or networking. An example in our case would be around designers and fashion designers, where we're building more relationships and networks in-house, but that's not a typical group of talent that are available on LinkedIn. And so in this case, then we would look to potentially engage a search firm that has a deep network in that area, and that would really look to offer talent insights and a really quick action in the market.
Great. Thank you, Nat. And I know that confidentiality piece you reference is often at some level always with the executive team. So great. And Gary, say your team is taking on a role in-house. What are the internal capabilities that you need to do the best job possible? What are you really assessing your internal team if it is coming in-house?
Yeah, good question. And some of what I'm going to go over, Natalie actually touched on in her initial response. I would say, it's two main areas, right? One, from a macro view, I think is really understanding the business strategy and, what's driving the need, right? So is it based on, growth, commercial revenue generation? Is it more related to succession planning, risk of someone leaving? It could be a confidential role. What are some of the key leadership competencies and capabilities? So from a macro view, I think that will, help to inform directionally where we go. If you take it one step further down, I would say more foundational. There are a few things that drive how we operate here at Danaher. One is really our operating model. Danaher is very, very process driven. So within recruiting and within exec recruiting, we have our processes, toll gates, or our recruiting playbook, and these are well defined in terms of what happens at each toll gate, who owns, who drives, and what are the key metrics and KPIs. So foundationally, we'd have to understand that. The second thing I would say that we would need is just strong partnership with our HR partners, for lack of a better word. And it could be our HR business partners and our talent management organization. So we're putting a big emphasis on having talent management partners aligned to our different businesses. And they help us to understand the talent that's available in those different businesses. So from a kickoff perspective, when we meet to initially discuss the role, they are with us at the table, and they will help to understand what the needs are. And then from there, they would help to bubble up and understand and bring to the table internal talent. So that partnership foundational is extremely important. The other piece that I would say from a capability perspective is really market intelligence and research capability. Our model is such that for each search, we have a researcher or a sourcer aligned to the recruiter, and they would really partner to understand, where does a talent exist? They would do market mapping, competitive intelligence, help us to design like a heat map, so to speak. And then even prior to the kickoff, we would leverage insights to help us to understand, demand supply scenarios. And then that way would use to even help to inform the search, because sometimes there is a slight disconnect between what we're looking for, what the market is really telling us. So we try to bridge those gaps with data and help to drive where we land. And then the final piece I would say is really establishing and putting some process around the interview process, the interview team, and who on the interview team has responsibility for specific questions around key competencies, and then mapping that back to other assessments that we do. So that was a bit long-winded, but a big part of it is just foundationally how we operate from a process or playbook perspective.
That's great. Thank you, Gary. And Jason, I know Nat and Gary both hinted on this and touched on the succession planning. So within your executive search team, how involved are you and your team in that succession planning and that talent management piece?
Oh, unmute.
Jason, you're on mute.
There's one in every call, isn't there? So we're getting there. I think is the short answer. So it is a journey, and a succession plan. As succession planning evolves from an HRBP and talent standpoint, executive recruitment and recruitment overall, I think, needs to be in lockstep with that. So if you look at a more nascent succession planning organization, they might see it as more of a checkbox exercise. It might not be as important, and executive recruitment is less involved. For an organization which is a little bit more mature, executive recruitment needs to be plugged in. We're the folks that are actually talking to internal candidates, managing process, presenting them, and ultimately hiring them. And depending on the company, I can't speak outside of financial services, but at an executive level, you're looking at between 40 and 60% of our hires will likely be internal. So we need to be plugged in on that. By the same token, I think a lot of succession planning does disappear quickly when a hiring manager says, oh no, I have a succession plan, but I really need something different because of AI or technology or disruption in the market. So we need to be part of those conversations early days so that we can help source, which is what Gary just covered off, and we can actually run a clean process overall. So it's critical that we're part of the succession planning conversations, but different firms have different maturity levels on where those are. So there's a good amount of variance across markets.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Jason. I'm good. And Tom, I'll kick it over to you to dive into the search process side.
Yeah, thanks. And actually, I'm gonna keep it with Jason, who is one of the best master networkers I've ever met in my life. Jason knows everybody everywhere.
That is true.
So in addition to your own networks, right, role comes up, obviously you're going to check that, but then how do you leverage the professional networks of your executive team as well? Not only the hiring person or the hiring team, but, other executives within the network, and how do you kind of keep track of that data?
Sure. I mean, I run off of a very simple theory, which is if you don't ask, you don't get. So as roles open up, I'm very direct, and if it's a role that I can share with executives around the firm or even externally, then proactively saying, hey, that we're doing this thing. Do you have any ideas? What could we do? It tends to work. What I do have more trouble with, which doesn't work for me as well, are the more professional networking groups. Those don't have the same results as a personal relationship in my experience. So it really is that simple. If it's a non-confidential role, I simply ask. Activate the network. LinkedIn is okay. But at an executive level, it's not something I would recommend. It's easy to get very muddy very, very quickly. So a targeted approach, find good people that you want that you want people like that, and ask them who they know. The dark side of referrals generally, and I've been hit with this, as you mentioned, Tom, I tend to really lean on my network, is you lose diversity very quickly. And that's not necessarily just diversity as far as what a government defines, but diversity of thought, diversity of working styles. So if you ask me for a referral, frankly, you're probably going to get somebody who I like and reminds me of myself. And that is not necessarily what you always want. You often want diversity. So keep that front and center. And a long time ago at a prior firm, I used my network for about 80% of my hires. And at year end, it was more than a wrist slap when it turns out everybody was just a white guy. So really, you need to focus on a mixture of pure referrals, as well as finding people in a different way, whether that's a search firm or cold calling or reaching out or whatever that is. Generally speaking, I don't know if I answered the question exactly the way you wanted me to. If you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
Go directly to your referrers, to your referrers. Make it personal. Blast emails don't work, and in my experience, professional networks tend to be a little bit more mercenary.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. And And Nat, most ATSs are built for, the general hiring needs of a company, right? So, hiring lots of people quickly and efficiently. But they probably don't deliver really quality executive search process and output. So what are some of the other tools that you use outside of, whatever Lulu's ATS is? I'm sure you're not even using that for most of the executive searches, right?
Yeah. Candidly, yeah, our ATS is kind of, I would say, more of a processing tool and
Mhm.
slight candidate management than anything. But really not like a critical or strategic tool that we'd use in any way. And I would say at present, and maybe other people watching this might resonate with this, our tools are fairly foundational and basic at the present time. And we're in a lot of conversations around a pretty significant technology transformation for the people and culture team as a whole. And a big part of that is around an integrated CRM, being the top of our list. One that, in no surprise in all of these conversations these days, is going to have automation, AI built in a way that's sustainable and does still support a strong candidate experience and a personalization within it. So that I would say is like the road ahead that we're excited for. And the interesting part now is I think the challenge is almost which one to pick and what do we want to prioritize within all of those tools available. And how can we kind of, leverage and use the team in a different way with all of those tools. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Nat. And Gary, you already talked a little bit, well, a little bit about the internal capabilities of, research functions and the like. Let me ask bit of a more general question, though. When you do go external, right, you've decided that for whatever reason the internal team isn't placed, best to help fill this role. What makes a good search partner for you, right? How do you assess the firms? What's important about that?
Yeah, good question, Tom. So, it's kind of similar to what Jason said. Sometimes you go to what's familiar and, firms who've delivered in the past. And, there's nothing wrong with that. But if it's a situation where we need to engage a new firm, I would say there are certain things that definitely comes to mind. One is industry knowledge. Our industry is extremely complex, and it takes a bit of effort to really understand and go deep in the industry. So that's one of the key things that I would say is definitely industry knowledge. Um, Another thing that I look for is firms who are not necessarily transactional, meaning I do not only want to speak to you when I have an opening, right? I want to have an ongoing relationship over time where you can bring market knowledge to the table. If there are things happening within the industry, you could say, hey, Gary, or here, Danaher, this is happening. This might be interesting to you guys. Or if there are leaders moving between companies, you could say, hey, I heard that this leader has moved from this company going to company X. How does that impact, your leadership structure? Is anyone at risk moving to this company? Or just having those type of conversations, I would say is important. And then, I've done heard we talk about the voice of the customer, which is always listening to our end customer and what they want. Any firm we're going to partner with, we are the end customer. So it has to be a firm who is not just driven based on what they want or how they think the search should be, but a firm that really listens to how we're framing up the role. They're able to say, hey, I understand you think this is the way it should be. However, based on what's happening in the market, here are some things you should consider. So having that consistent two-way dialogue, I think is important. And then a firm who would also help us to understand, okay, here is what I'm hearing in the marketplace, compensation, equity-wise at these levels, at these roles. If you're not aligned, you should probably speak into your compensation teams, etc. So it's a mix of different things, but the key for me is not necessarily anchored on a particular search at this point in time, but just over time, a consistent dialogue around different touch points and different subjects.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll toss it back to Jim to talk a little bit more about that, that partnership between search firms and executive recruiting teams in-house.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And Gary, that's a great point of that maintaining the relationship in between searches. Jason and Nat, I would open it up to you as well. What do you really look for? Is it only market trends and you see movement, or is there any other detail you look for in ongoing communication from external firms?
Nat, after you.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I really love that I see from some firms is when we actually see specific talent moves in our industry, like, of executives. That's really helpful and such good insight, and kind of speaks to the market knowledge also. But the specificity of that is really helpful. And it's interesting when I think of a partner, what I would say, how our like program has evolved over time. We used to likely work with the same firms over and over and over. And now we definitely appreciate that relationship, and those that are performing well will of course continue to work with them. But now, like, that niche understanding of a skill set is more important to us as we've built our own internal in-house capabilities where we're more generalists and our partners are more like niche specialists that support us when we need them. So being able to demonstrate that, at the same time. And I would agree with Gary. Like, I think I've had some firms ask me, is it kind of too much if we talk too often or if we reach out too often? And I would say no, within reason. And that we really do want to talk in between searches and really learn a lot from our partners. It's a symbiotic relationship. We really need them to be successful. So yeah, over to you, Jason.
Thanks. 1000% agree with everything, but specifically Nat, when she described the relationship as symbiotic. So my view is search firms are not necessarily vendors; they're partners. And my role or my team's role within any specific search is to protect our partners, and our partners protect us to get to the right outcome. So I have had experience with in-house recruiters that might have a little bit more of an edge to them, and they see themselves as the clients, and frankly, that doesn't work long term. So having that partnership is critical, and that relationship is critical. And what I need in a search firm is to tell the truth, work hard, and be smart. These are not very difficult things to have. Frankly, in a search firm, if they don't know a market, they can probably figure it out. If they don't know a specific candidate, they can get to them. But if they don't have a basic work ethic, if they're not ethical in working with us properly, and they don't have common sense, then it's not going to work. I critically believe that having that partnership relationship model is absolutely critical. So I do keep in touch with my search firms when we're not working on searches, and frankly, I do everything I can to actually gray that line a little bit. I would like to have a bit of a, without going on the holidays or anything like that, I do like to have a friendship with our partners so that we trust each other and they can reach out to me, even if their spider sense is tingling a little bit and things might not be right. I'd rather hear it up front, and that relationship is critical for me to get that stuff.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Jason. And let's stick on that vendor versus true strategic partner. Gary and Nat, open it up to you. Any other specific criteria that differentiates a vendor from a strategic partner?
Go ahead, Natalie.
Go ahead, Gary. Yeah, you go.
I would say, two things come to mind, and this is based on, how we work at Danaher. I would say, we like to partner with firms who are outcome driven, right? So from the get-go, we're striving towards a specific outcome. And it's not just, sharing resumes around a specific search, but, here's how we're going to get to this specific outcome. Here's my strategy. We could challenge if needed, to help drive towards that outcome. And then, we tend to move at pace here. So really understanding the pace at which we move. And not all firms could move at that pace. And it kind of goes back to what Jason was saying, which is transparency, right? And that level of integrity. If I've had firms that say, hey, I honestly cannot take on this search, right? For different reasons. And it's okay. It's okay to say no. I would much rather a search firm tell me that I walk away appreciating that point of view versus going into a search with a firm only to realize that this is not something they could take on, right? So that level of transparency, honesty, and integrity, I cannot really overestimate that.
Yeah. I mean, I would add like only the same, and agree. And I think one of the things and kind of in that urgency, we do have some partners that we don't always appreciate their partnership as much as if we're having to follow up with them, we're not always feeling like, kind of we're more engaged in the search than they may be. That's obviously a critical piece that we would really want them to be, pushing us for answers, pushing us for more information. And in that partnership, also just really willing to, push back with our leaders, right? And talk through what are the challenges and having really open, transparent conversations with teams around if the expectations aren't realistic, what are the archetypes we need to be focusing on versus others, and really like coming in as a true strategic partner in partnership with us. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I actually, Jim, I was just going to add, from my days leading in-house recruiting teams, I was always surprised, and it goes back to what Nat said about having the number of firms you had to chase, right? And I think having, sat on that side of the desk where, Nat, Jason, and Gary are now, and now moving to executive search, it's given me a much greater appreciation for how our process always has been, but it's not rocket science, right? It's, we have weekly meetings, if we can't do it one week, that's fine, but we still have the rhythm and discipline to follow up and send a search report and ask for feedback and all those things. And I'm always surprised at our clients that some of them have never had that before. And so that's great for us because, we can make a great impression with them, but I feel sad for them in other ways that they haven't had that up until now.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tom, that's a really good point, because if you think about the premium that retained search firm charges, right?
Yeah.
What are you paying for? That should be table stakes based on, the fees that are charged.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. And Tom, I'd say we keep it with your questioning, just with this partnership, what does success look like at the end of the day, outside of just a placement?
Yeah, and let me start with Nat on that. I mean, do you have specific metrics that you track on a periodic basis, quarterly, annually, about particularly the executive search? What's going on within executive search at Lululemon?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say we definitely track our, the more foundational, metrics. So that would be like, time to hire, and one of the key ones is around quality of hire. And for us, one thing that we really track is not always, but at least more than half of our searches, we hire off the first slate. We really believe in presenting in a slate, and a group of candidates to compare contrast. And if we can hire off the first slate with our own teams and our search firms, it really means we understood the brief, we understood the stakeholders, we'd mapped our interviews. There's so much that goes into clarity with that kind of small, metric. So yeah.
Great.
And I'm just getting kicked out of this room, so I'll be off video for a second, and I'm gonna go to another room. So I'm here, but I'll be right back. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Well, yeah, and I'll ask that same question to Jason and Gary, right? What are the things that you track internally to make sure you're hitting expectations or exceeding them?
So from my perspective, I think executive recruitment is a unique unicorn, and having across the board metrics, hey, this is our time to fill for every executive, or this is our whatever for every executive hire we make. It's apples and oranges. So we have, I'm working on a role right now where the hiring manager said, this is going to take us 2 years. I want to be thoughtful, hire the right person, and I don't care how long it takes. And if I measure not quality of hire, that's important. If I measure time to fill on that search against me, I'm going to get fired because it's going to take forever, and that's fine. So really, the only metric that I deeply care about is, well, a few. It's all about the experience. So the only measure is the experience, and then in order of importance to me is the candidate experience is number one. Every candidate is a potential candidate for the next role, and every candidate is either a client or hopefully will be a client. And if they have a bad experience, that damages us and our brands big time. And some of the bigger hires that come through, if we really have a terrible experience with a very, very senior networked person, it can be exponentially bad. So candidate experience is number one. Hiring manager experience is number two. And then as the white in my beard has gotten more pronounced, I've realized that our partner, which is both HRBP and search firm experience, is also important. So what we try to do is track experiences on the tail end of the search and in real time. So my recruiters, when they meet the hiring manager for the intake, will typically say, listen, if you have a bad experience, if things aren't going well, these are your escalation points and what you do. So we can track that proactively in real time. And then following the search, it's not scientific, but it is, hey, how did it go? What would you do better? And this is both for hiring managers as well as candidates that we don't hire if we can get it right.
Yeah, great. And Gary?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting point of view, Jason. And it's interesting how sometimes tracking and metrics vary based on industry. Within Danaher, we're part of what we do is, manufacturing. We're a biosciences company. And at the heart and foundation of Danaher is our Danaher business system. So we're very, very metrics and KPI and operational driven. So that also feeds into recruiting and ETA. Within exec recruiting, we have, leading and lagging indicators, right? So from a lagging indicator perspective, we have what we call, obviously time to fill, and we've got on-time delivery, which is the number of searches we fill within a certain time period, right? Now, both of those, based on different factors, could be outside of the control of our recruiters, right? To your point, JC, you might have a manager that says, hey, we're looking to fill this role. We know it's going to take us 2 years, right? There's not a lot a recruiter could do, given that, context. But from a leading indicator perspective, there's certain things that the recruiter has a bit more control over. So, things like the percentage of interviews within a certain time period, the quality of our slate, and then the average time it takes for us to build a slate and take that to the leader. So we track from both perspectives, but understanding that there are things that we can control more directly on a day-to-day basis versus things that are more market-driven and outside of our control.
Great. Well, good. Well, thanks, everybody. I think we're just about out of time, but just any other closing comments or key takeaways you'd like to leave with the audience?
Yeah,
So pretty-
I yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say I might offer just one that I kind of mentioned before is that like as we even as we grow internal recruiting teams, I don't think it changes, particularly in an executive recruiting context, it changes the relationship, with a partner. The volume might change, yes, but the relationship really is the same, and
Yeah.
and it's a really important partnership that we need. And someone like yourself, Tom and Jim, we really appreciate the support, and it's a strategic part of the program. So, yeah.
Yeah.
100% agree with that. I think that's right. The only other sort of last thing that I would put in is I mentioned work hard, tell the truth, and be smart is what I look for in our search firms. I also look for that in our candidates and the people who work for me. And the fundamental success factor, I think, in these partnerships is the instinct to run towards the fire. Meaning, if something's not right, if I'm like, oh, I had a bad conversation with Tom Wilson and I'm going to avoid him for a couple of days, that is the absolute wrong instinct. If there's anything that's a flag in any way, you need to run towards it and fix it immediately in a transparent way. That is the number one problem that I've had in my career in leading teams and partners and the rest is people will say, oh, this isn't great. I'm gonna give it space. It doesn't work.
Yep. And I would just close by saying, Tom, and I think Jason alluded to this, in that some of the more successful in-house exec recruiting teams I've seen have a strong partnership with external retained firms, right? The stronger that partnership is, there are a number of like offshoots that would tend to help the internal teams be successful. And it is a partnership, right? It's not a competition. It is, how can we work effectively towards this common goal? And that's how we tend to look at it.
Great. Well, thank you.